Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Stephen Pollard, I'm editor of the JC. I thought political meetings were supposed to be dead. I mean, this is fantastic. To have a turnout like this is democratic Britain in action. So thank you all for coming, and I hope this will be a very interesting and informative and hopefully even fun evening for you all. You don't want to hear from me, but I would like to, first of all, thank Hasmonean for hosting this, and especially to thank the volunteers from CST, who are here to ensure their safety. It's a sign of the times that we have to rely on. So thank you very much to CST, and also thank you to UKIP Friends of Israel for helping this event to happen. Just to say a few words about the format, Nigel Farage, the guest tonight, will speak for a while, then I'll interview him briefly, and then we'll open it up to you, because you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear, I'm sure you all have questions you want to ask, and I'm sure the remarks that he'll make, and maybe some of the questions I ask will prompt some thoughts. So we'll have as much time for that as possible, and then we'll see where we go with that. Anyway, without further ado, let me call on our speaker to come up. Nigel Farage really needs no introduction, so I won't give much of an introduction, other than to say, you all know that in the local elections, 23% of the vote. Really, a quite astonishing achievement in the May elections, 23% of the vote. I'm sure there was no political comment intended by that. Sorry. No, not at all. An astonishing achievement, whatever your politics, 23% of the vote. I, for one, certainly am fascinated to hear from the man himself, but specifically, this is a Jewish Chronicle event, so although we'll talk about some general national politics, my intention very much is to focus this also on matters that are of specific interest to the Jewish community, to find out where UKIP stand on those issues and to take issue with some of them perhaps and to probe a bit deeper. Anyway, as I say, the evening will begin, Mr. Farage will make some remarks, then I'll question him and then I'll open up to questions. So, thank you. Nigel. Jerry, can you move that away, please? Yeah. No.
Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Right, well, that was not an act of sabotage against our chairman. But whenever I turn the microphone on, it caused an awful lot of trouble, so we'll finish with that. Can I begin by saying a massive thanks to the Hasmonean School and the Jewish Chronicle for sponsoring this event, and an even bigger thank you to all of you for turning out on one of the most beautiful evenings of the year. I'm told by my friends that I have in the Liberal Democrat, Labour and Conservative parties, though to be fair there aren't many of them, but I'm told the public meeting is dead. Politics is now all about the soundbite, it's all about appearing on the telly, and what you really must make sure you never do is to go out and meet the public and be challenged by them. Well, let me tell you, I take completely the opposite view, and it's great to see so many of you here this evening, and whether you've come along here because you support UKIP and support what I have to say, whether you've come along with an open mind, whether you've come along because you just want to confirm all the reasons that you hate me, I'm not concerned by either of those things. I'm delighted to see you all here. And as Stephen, our chairman, said, what happened on May the 2nd this year was pretty remarkable. If you go back to 2009, in the European elections, UKIP did do remarkably well. We came second across the United Kingdom, but everybody said, well, don't worry about that. It doesn't really matter, because UKIP will never do it in any form of domestic election. And indeed, I know myself, after 20 years of hard pounding, that it's not always been easy for a party like UKIP to make a big electoral impression. And I say this because I was in fact the party's first ever candidate. We formed the party back in September 93. Within 6 weeks, I awoke to the news that the Tory Member of Parliament for Eastleigh, one Stephen Milligan, had died overnight in what some may call strange circumstances. The older ones here understand it, and for the younger, ask your dads. And so I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, I've joined this party, I'll be a candidate for UKIP. So I stood as UKIP's first ever candidate. And I can tell you, with some considerable pride, that by the crushing winning margin, clear blue water, of 162 votes, I managed to beat the late, great, screaming Lord Such, leader of the Mozarabian Party, and therefore we weren't last. But if you fast forward 19 years on, there was another Eastleigh by-election, this time caused, of course, by Chris Hoon not owning up to 3 speeding points. Funny, isn't it? But I've never liked Chris Hoon very much. But isn't it funny that a glittering political career could be ended by something as simple as that? It all goes to show that when your granny tells you, if you're in trouble, hold your hands up and admit you've done wrong, it's the right thing to do. Anyway, Hoon didn't do that. But fast forwarding 19 years, and what happened in the second Eastleigh by-election? Well, UKIP got 28% of the vote. Amazing. The Lib Dems just held on with 31, and arguably, without the postal vote, we would have beaten them completely. And what was really interesting was this. You see, if you read the Daily Mail, I would have said the Express, but Stephen writes for them, you know. But if you read the Daily Mail, their headline the next day was UKIP deprives the Tories of the Eastleigh seat. And there is this feeling that all UKIP voters are retired half-colonels living on the edge of Salisbury Plain. And that the whole thing is some right-wing, reactionary, stop the world, I want to get off movement. That is what the British press would have you believe. And yet, if you do the analysis on Eastleigh, you find, and Lord Ashcroft did it for us, Lord Ashcroft spent a fortune finding out who had voted UKIP, why had they voted UKIP, and you know, where had they come from previously. And I'm very grateful to Lord Ashcroft for spending all that money, because it saved us as a party from having to do it. And what it showed was a third of our vote came from the Tories. A third of our vote came from the Lib Dems. 20% of our vote in that constituency came from Old Labour. And 10% of our vote came from people who had not voted for any party for 20 years or more, so disengaged did they feel by the whole electoral process. So the reason, folks, that David Cameron was incapable of retaking the Eastleigh constituency was not because of UKIP's candidate Diane James and this ghastly Farage figure. No, the reason the Tories didn't win Eastleigh was because traditional Tory voters in those Hampshire villages on the River Itchen, who were used to hearing a Conservative Party that talked about enterprise, success, now have a Tory leader who seems to believe that gay marriage, the building of wind turbines, and making sure the foreign aid budget is the highest of any Western world country are the major. UKIP draws its support from across the board, and we do so because we stand up against a political class who are now completely and utterly disconnected with the thoughts, hopes and aspirations of ordinary, decent people in this country. We are being run by a bunch of college kids. A bunch of college kids, nearly all of them. All of who went to the same school. They certainly all went to Oxford. They certainly all did PPE. They then, every one of them, became researchers in a back office and members of Parliament aged 27 or 28 years old. We are being run, ladies and gentlemen, by a group of people from the so-called three main parties who have never done a day's work in their lives. So UKIP marks a real contrast to that, and whatever my flaws may be, and they're many, but I did work for 20 years in the private sector. I worked in the commodities business. I worked buying and selling base metals, non-ferrous metals, and as I often say to people, you know, I can say hand on heart, unlike them, that I worked damn hard in the private sector for 20 years, up until lunchtime, every single day. It all went wrong after that, but that was my choice. And what you've got with UKIP is a party that is daring to touch on and talk about issues that everybody else has chosen to brush under the carpet. Now let me be clear. When some people say that UKIP is a single issue party because all they talk about is Europe, what they are forgetting, what they are ignoring, that what we're talking about here is the biggest single constitutional question this country has faced since the 17th century. It is a question that is so absolutely fundamental that it goes to the roots of what being a nation is. It goes absolutely to the core of what democracy is. Listen, old son, you'll have your chance later, don't you worry. It goes to the core of what democracy actually is. And I believe that this country, whatever its faults may be, we're the people that developed since Magna Carta the best system of common law that actually exists in the world. We are the people that took the original Greek concept of democracy and turned it into a concept named parliamentary democracy. And we made it, and we forged it, and in fact we exported it to the rest of the world. And we're the country. Don't anybody ever call UKIP or call the British people Little Englanders or people with a small island mentality. Far from that. Actually, through history, we've been the most pro-European country in Europe. Because if you think about it, those that went before us went to war twice to defend not just our democracy, independence, liberty and freedom, but the democracy, independence, liberty and freedom of other European nations too. And that, in my view, and what happened in the 70s? A whole group of politicians decided that the answer was the common market. And those in this room, over the age of 55, voted in that referendum. And I can see one or two of you that qualify and did vote in that referendum. Equally, actually half the audience probably didn't vote in that referendum. But those of you over 55 who believe what you were told by that nice Mr. Heath and Mr. Wilson and Mr. Thorpe before the Old Bailey trial, but you were told, remember, it was a common market. It was about free trade. It was about a post-war Europe being friendly, working and trading with each other. Nobody told you that we finish up today in a position where we have to pay a membership fee of £55 million a day to an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 18 years in a row, who now make 75% of our legislation, whose obsession with climate change means that our landscapes and seascapes are being despoiled by these ugly, disgusting and totally useless wind turbines. You can clap. And no one told us this. And still, the three so-called main parties hang on to this crazy idea that we must be part of a European Union because it's good for business. Well, in some ways, It is good for business. It's very good for Mercedes. And it's very good for Audi. And it's very good for BMW and Volkswagen. And it's really rather good for my particular favourite exporters of Rioja. And all of that works. But we are now part of a trading market with whom we trade at a deficit of £45 billion a year. They sell us more than we sell them. Why can't we do what the Swiss do, what the Norwegians do? Why can't we have a simple free trade agreement for our international industries without the rest of us, those of us trying to run small businesses, those of us trying to climb up the rungs of the ladder to do better for ourselves and our family? Why do we need Herman Van Rompuy? I've got to tell you, I'm not on his Christmas card list. But why do we need Herman Van Rompuy? Whoever asked for a European flag? Whoever asked for a European anthem? None of us. And that applies not just in this country, but it applies in the rest of Europe too. And I will not have anybody ever telling me that UKIP is an anti-European party. I want a Europe of sovereign, democratic nation-states trading together, cooperating together, being good next-door neighbours with each other. But this idea that we will stop the Germans from being beastly by all becoming part of one big state is in fact disproven totally by what's happened in Yugoslavia. Because the same idea applied there. You know, the politicians got together in Paris in 1920. They said we can't have all these ridiculous little Balkan nations constantly going to war with each other, going around shooting archdukes and causing all this trouble. We're going to get them all together, give them one flag, one anthem, one currency, one police force, one identity. It'll be peace forever in the Balkans. And within the lifetimes, even of the youngest people in this room, we have seen the worst atrocities in the European time zone that we've seen since 1945 as people have fought to break out. Abolishing nation state isn't going to work. Imposing a single economic and monetary union across Europe isn't going to work. But what will work, and what will guarantee we'll never see war in Europe again, is if each of the European nations are democratic, free nations that are friends with each other. And that's people went out on May the 2nd and they voted for us because they despise the current political class who don't connect with them. They went out on May the 2nd and they voted for us because, like us, they want us to trade with Europe, but to govern our own country and respect and bring back our own democracy. But they also voted for us because we dared to touch on an issue that really had been brushed under the carpet for decades. And that issue is immigration. Now, let's just think back about British history on immigration and what is these days called asylum. But I want to abolish the word asylum. I want to go back to the original meaning of the word, which was refugee status. You know, we all understood what that meant. And this country has been the most open and the most welcoming country in the whole of Europe to genuine refugees fleeing in fear of their lives. We did it to the Huguenots back in the 18th century, and Jeremy Paxman seems to think it's terribly funny that my family were prosecuted French Protestants, that somehow I'm not fit to lead UKIP because my family originally came from another European country, all of which goes to show how the BBC completely and utterly missed the point about what is great about this country, that we are tolerant, and we are open, and that it matters to us, and that we have values. And we did the same thing for Jews being persecuted in Russia just over 100 years ago. And we did the same thing again for Jews being oppressed in Germany, and perhaps Austria too. And we did the same thing again in 1972, when that madman, Amin, said that he would massacre all, remember, all of the Asians who were living in Uganda. We had a very big debate in 1972 about could we cope with the sheer numbers of people, the sheer number of Asian people living in Uganda that would come to Britain. And there were many that said that an influx of this size would be difficult to assimilate into Britain. In the end, we decided that our moral obligation was so great, and that the fear of those people literally being killed by this idiot meant that we would throw caution to the wind. And we did. And 27,000 people, 27,000 men, women and children from Uganda came to Britain in 1972. I'm pleased to say that they have been one of the most successful immigrant groups that have ever come to Britain. They produce more millionaires, and their children have integrated better, and it's been a huge success. But ladies and gentlemen, it is about numbers. Because what Blair did was to literally open the doors to the whole of the world. And in particular, to open the doors to the whole of the former communist states in Eastern Europe. And when I talk about the former refugee migrations to Britain, when I talk about the managed migration policy that we had from Windrush up until nearly the year 2000, at the very most, we were talking about 30 to 50,000 people a year coming into Britain. For the last 10 years, ladies and gentlemen, the average number of new entrants into Britain has been slightly over 500,000 people a year. It is impossible. It is unsustainable. We do not have the infrastructure. We do not have the hospital places. We do not have the social service welfare provision for this country to head towards a population of 70 million by 2025. And that's where we're going. And what I've majored on is the fact that on January the 1st next year, we will open our doors to 28 million people from Romania and Bulgaria, countries that are far poorer than Poland or Latvia and Lithuania, and we open our doors on a completely unconditional basis. Now, I would put this to you, as I put it to the electorate in the county elections on May the 2nd this year. How can it make sense when we have 1 million of our own young people, our 60 to 24-year-olds, already unemployed? How can it make sense to unconditionally open up the borders to an uncontrolled supply of unlimited, unskilled labour? Surely the time has come for us to say, let's put the interests of our own people first. And how can it be right? How can it be right that if you come here on January the 1st next year from Romania or Bulgaria, you can claim unemployment benefit and housing benefit within a fortnight of being here? Surely the basic principle should be that the only people that should claim social security in Britain should be people who have been here for 5 years, obeyed the law and paid into the tax system. And I would also add, and this perhaps is the ultimate taboo that nobody has dared to ever raise before, but it's true. If you look at the crime figures for London alone, for ATM crime, year on year, first quarter 2012 to first quarter 2013, there has been a trebling of the numbers of people in London who, when they've gone to get cash out from the whole of the war machine, have been mugged. A trebling. And 92% of those people, 92% have been Romanian. Right. Now, I would argue this, that with the exception of refugees fleeing in fear of their lives, which actually makes up a tiddly percentage of the immigration figures, with that exception, that what we ought to do in terms of Britain's immigration policy going forward is not to be members of the European Union, not to have open, unconditional borders, but to follow the model that one Commonwealth country has done in the last 10 years. And this country has, I think, the best immigration policy in the world. What this country says is if you've got a skill to bring and you will add to the economic and social life of our country, you are welcome. By the way, they say, if you have a criminal record, if you have a life-threatening disease, you're not welcome. And we don't care what colour you are, we don't care what religion you are, we don't care what your origination is, but if you come here, remember this: whilst we respect your rights of private observance, if you come to live with us, you become part of our Australian dream.
Right.
Now, there's one other area, one other policy area that I will talk about tonight, and it's this. I think that the real heroes of the British economy are the 4.5 million small businessmen and women in this country who in many cases slog their guts out, take huge financial risks, often spend their lives actually working so that the staff can get paid rather than they can get paid. And it's those small businessmen and women that provide over 60% of the jobs in the private sector in this country. There is no other group of people who have suffered more by two things. Firstly, being run by career politicians who've never had a job, but secondly, by being part of a statist, over-regulated European Union, which means they're terrified to employ people unless they have to get rid of them. They're bound up in a health and safety culture that has gone to levels that it is frankly ludicrous. And they are stuck. They are stuck with environmental rules as a result of Europe's total obsession with global warming, which may or may not be happening, but even if it is, what is the point in beggaring British industry with expensive electricity when the Chinese and the Indians have already said they're going to build 900 new coal-fired power stations over the course of the next decade? We've got to free up enterprise in this country. We've got to give our small businessmen and women an opportunity to go out and create wealth for themselves. Because if they create wealth for themselves, they'll pay taxes. And without people paying taxes, we can't fund schools and hospitals. And that's another major strand of what UKIP stands for, and why people went out on May the 2nd and voted for us in such considerable numbers. So we've changed, I think, we've changed the whole nature of the national debate of politics in this country. Mr. Cameron, who 2 years ago three-line whipped his own party not to have a referendum on the EU, has now three-line whipped his party to having a referendum on the EU. Not that I believe in. I mean, would you buy a used car from David Cameron, you know? I mean, given that he gave us a cast iron guarantee just a few years ago, and then let us down very badly. I wouldn't believe him personally, but reflect the fact that he's changed. Ed Miliband is now apologising for immigration that happened under the term of the Labour government. And Nick Clegg is apologising for virtually everything that has happened since 1066. So we've put the brightness on them, we've got things moving, we've got a proper debate going, and the next set of elections that we have in this country take place on May the 22nd next year. And that is when we have the European elections. And UKIP came third in those elections in 2004. We came second in those elections in 2009. And my aim, as the only party that clearly, openly and unequivocally stands up for this country being a self-governing, independent, proud, global trading, free, independent nation, is we want to win those elections next year on May the 12th. Now I know that in a moment Stephen is going to question me on specific Jewish affairs, and that's fine, but I want to say this to you. And I'm not coming here, like everybody else, to be fawning to the Jewish community, to say you're the most important group of people that exist in this country, although in many ways you may well be. But, you know, I'm not a con man. I'm not a con man, but I will say this. We, as a party, absolutely fundamentally do believe in the right of the State of Israel to exist, and we have huge sympathy for it. We have, in the European Parliament, you know, absolutely done our bit. Shimon Cohen, who's here somewhere, has been lobbying very, very hard on Chiquita, where there is some very serious difficulty at European level to stop these practices from happening. Stuart Agnew, who is a UKIP MEP and a farmer from East Anglia, in fact went and visited in the East End of London a kosher slaughterhouse and wrote a report saying that on balance he thought the methods being employed were far better than those being used in the standard abattoirs across the rest of this country. So we have stood up and we have fought for these issues. Indeed, I was reminded today that the new UKIP head office has moved into a building called Moss House, named after Stephen Moss, whose father was chief executive of the Jewish Chronicle for many years. And we have many Jewish people who stand for UKIP and are members of UKIP. Indeed, our last party secretary was a man named Michael Zuckerman. So there we are. I've done my bit for you. And I've done what politicians do. But I want to say this, and this needs deeper thought, perhaps more questioning. You know, there is no question that we now have a very, very diverse society in this country, and especially in London. But I think what we need to do, and I hope what you think we need to do, is we need to actually embrace something of what John Howard, that Aussie Prime Minister, said to the Australian nation. Whilst we've got all these different cultures and different peoples here in this country, for goodness sake, we must at least all speak the same language. It is genuinely shocking to travel now on public transport in many parts of London and literally to feel, am I the only person here that is speaking English? We have gone through 40 years of state-sponsored, taxpayer-funded multiculturalism. And the idea of multiculturalism has been to exaggerate the differences between all of our communities. And I believe we must go for the opposite approach, which is to respect each other, respect our differences, respect our religions, respect our private observance, but to be bound together with one absolute aim that we can all share, whoever we are, whatever our religion, and wherever we're from, and that is unashamedly, we are going to be patriotic about Great Britain, and we want Great Britain to be a democratic, free, and great nation.